Let's reflect then on the events of this day 12 years on. Busi Thabane is the director at the Benchmarks Foundation and joins us now via our video link. And Busi, thanks for your time. It's great to have you on the SABC News channel. You know, the Benchmarks Foundation has always spoken out around this time since the Marikana Massacre itself. And I wonder this year what your reflections are, because the thing about time sometimes is that it allows us to see things a bit clearer as we take stock of the extent to which we've moved forward or have not since the events of the 16th of August.
Thank you, Ayanda, and thanks for having us. Yes, that's true. The Benchmarks Foundation, 12 years ago, we did release a report. We actually went to Marikana a few months before the massacre when we were doing the fieldwork in preparation for the report. And we did say in our report that what we saw in Marikana, the conditions, the working conditions, the living conditions were not acceptable. And this is something that we called for, but unfortunately at that time, it fell on deaf ears. And then 2 days later, the massacre happened. Now, when we look back 12 years later, unfortunately, we see that we are still in the same place. Actually, 2 weeks ago, as the Benchmarks Foundation, we went into Wonderkop in Kanini's informal settlement because we're doing a follow-up survey on what's happening currently now. And what we found there 2 weeks ago was very sad. Firstly, the working conditions for workers still have not changed. We've noticed that workers have been telling us that in 2012, they were demanding a living wage of 12,500 rand. At the moment, I think they are looking at about 16,000 rand. But if you look at the high rise in cost of living and inflation, it has no value. Whatever increases that have been made, those little gains that have been made in 2024, 16,000 rand, not much has changed. And also adding to that as well is that workers have been telling us that in terms of their working conditions, we have seen that there has been an increase in the changes of how people have been hired. There's been a number of subcontracted workers that have been hired. And the point of hiring these subcontractors is making sure that when you hire subcontracted workers, you pay them less than what you would pay your permanent workers. So there has been an increase in that. And we feel that this is how the companies are trying to cut their labor costs. And that is very sad because you find that these subcontracted workers don't have much say in terms of their labor rights. So they are put into dangerous working areas, unsafe working areas, and there's nothing much they can say about it because of their fear of being dismissed. And the workers are also experiencing a lot of intimidation, a lot of victimization in their workplace, in the shafts. We know of the talk of retrenchments and retrenchment notices that keep being issued all the time for workers. So the environment is very it's not a conducive working environment. The workers are very vulnerable. And then you also, to that situation, you add there are also living conditions. We did say in our previous reports that what happened in Marikana was that they used to live in these same-sex hostels. But what has happened now is that many of the workers are on living out allowances, and now they live in the communities. So what happens is they live in the closest communities, in the informal settlements of Kanini, in Wonderkop, and this also puts a burden on the infrastructure or the non-existing infrastructure in these communities, and it is a recipe for disaster. Crime levels have gone up, socio-economic issues are rising in these areas, so it is kind of not a very good place to be. So not much has changed in Marikana.
Sure, and I suppose, you know, the question we always ask around this anniversary is, have these mine workers died in vain? And it seems the answer this year may be a bit sobering.
It is very sobering indeed, because as we were in Marikana about 2 weeks ago, you find that there are still some people that have been, that were working there at the time, that have still not been able to leave and go back home. As we know that the mining industry in South Africa is very notorious for taking on migrant laborers. And when they leave or are retrenched in the mines, their pension funds have still not been paid out, so they cannot go home. So they are sitting sitting in these informal settlements, they have no source of income. They're a burden on the communities. And of course, they will resort to crime. So we wonder what has happened. And it has been falling on deaf ears. And the unfortunate part is that government has not been coming to the party, because part of government's responsibility is to be able to enforce things like the social labor plans that the mine has. But we find that the Department of Minerals is definitely not doing that as well.